You are traveling through another dimension. A dimension of sight. A dimension of sound. You have just crossed over into a universe of beauty and terror. That other dimension is not far away. It's right here, just beneath those waves. Award-winning filmmaker Howard Hall takes us to the Sea of Cortes, the deep waters that divide the deserts of Mexico from those of Baja California. It's a journey that's both dangerous and mysterious. A narrow abyss separates the arid lands of northern Mexico from the shores of Baja California. This is the Sea of Cortes. Seamounts rise from the cold depths. Their summits stretch high into the warm, sunlit waters. Enchanted flocks soar above these jagged peaks. This is the tube blenny's magical world. He makes his home in an abandoned barnacle and spends his days watching legions of shadows pass overhead. Most shadows, though strangely shaped, are familiar. But there are new shadows here, shadows which could threaten and forever change the Sea of Cortes. The seamount is a meeting point for undersea voyagers. All manner of creatures gather here. The whale shark is the behemoth of fish. At over 40 feet, weighing more than 20 tons, no fish is larger. Yet like the great whales, this hulking beast eats only plankton and small schooling fish. It moves in search of the swarms of small fish that sustain it. Remoras, or shark suckers, cling to the whale shark, swimming freely in and out of its enormous mouth. Some remoras find their way inside the shark's cavernous throat, moving easily through its giant gill slits. Other remoras get an easy ride, surfing on the slipstream of this graceful leviathan. It's more than just an undersea giant. The whale shark is a living reef upon which hundreds of smaller creatures depend. Escorted by its tiny attendants, the whale shark descends to cooler waters, richer in plankton. Mists shroud these mountain summits. This undulating fog is actually clouds of mysid shrimp. In incredible numbers, they flow and tumble in the rising current. Cold, nutrient-rich waters cultivate blooms of phytoplankton. And it's the phytoplankton that feed the clouds of shrimp. This upwelling of deep-water plankton is the foundation for the oasis of life found in this desert sea. It's a moving smorgasbord for the little blenny. But only when the tiny shrimp drift within reach does he dare leave his home for a quick meal. He is the most paranoid of fish. His little hyperactive eyes move independently, allowing him to watch for danger in two directions at once. Sardine populations explode in response to this shrimp bounty. The sounds of their watery dance means there's a feast to be had. This irresistible lure entices schools of common dolphins. The water churns with dolphins and tuna. In their feeding frenzy, they devour sardines by the ton. These barren desert islands provide nesting space, but nothing to eat for these flocks of terns and gulls. It's the surrounding sea that nourishes each new generation. This underwater Garden of Eden has its snakes. They are garden eels emerging from sand burrows to feed. They too are looking for mysid shrimp. They cock their bodies like coiled springs before snapping up a meal. Like the two blenny, garden eels seldom leave home for food. They need only wait for the current to deliver and stay watchful for shadows of predators passing overhead. Feeding is not the only reason that voyagers come to the seamount. These chubs are enjoying the attentions of several butterfly fish, whose mouths are perfectly suited for plucking off parasites. Larger patrons require larger, cleaner fish. The clarion angel grooms one of the seamount's most magnificent visitors. A manta ray passes over the seamount, hoping to attract the attention of cleaners. The manta swims as slowly as possible, allowing the angelfish to groom it. Like an airplane, the manta is in danger of stalling if forward speed is too slow. It must keep moving or fall. Repeatedly, the 20-foot manta passes over the seamount to attract angelfish, which are reluctant to stray too far from shelter. Like giant pterodactyls soaring by a prehistoric mountain, mantas fly formations over the seamount. No marine creature is more graceful. As the manta rays leave, the angelfish returns to the shelter of the reef. At the seamount's base, the ocean floor is covered with living rubble. This colorful debris is actually clumps of coralline algae. And there are creatures that travel like moles within the rubble. The snake eel will leave the rubble to forage on the surface. But when danger threatens, it returns to safety, tail first. The tip of the eel's tail is hard and sharp, allowing it to push through the rubble in reverse when it needs to hide. But a snake eel is too large a meal for the stingray, which prefers more bite-sized prey, like this ghost shrimp. The male blue-spotted jawfish proudly displays his courtship colors. He doesn't like to leave the safety of his burrow. He does so only long enough to beckon females. For the female jawfish, however, love is a more dangerous enterprise. She must leave her burrow to choose her mate. By the narrowest margin, she escapes the gaping maw of the scorpionfish. No longer in the mood for love, she decides to build a new burrow and stay home for the evening. Another rubble resident leaves the protection of his cozy den in search of an afternoon meal. But somewhere nearby lurks a perfectly concealed and very frustrated scorpionfish. But the scorpionfish has bitten off more than he can chew. The octopus is simply too large to swallow. The octopus returns to the comfort of his den and settles in for a rest. Meanwhile, the ghost shrimp has taken a tragic turn in the wrong direction. What was once prey is now predator. In a few moments, all that remains of the ghost shrimp is an empty shell. Currents surge northward as the incoming tide floods the Sea of Cortes. Especially between March and June, 20-foot tides push enormous volumes of water into the northern Gulf. In some areas, the surging tide pushes the water miles inland. The height of the spring tide marks an extraordinary event, an age-old ceremony of arrival. Here, millions of grunion cast themselves up on the beach. Unlike all other marine fish, the grunion have chosen to entrust their eggs to the dangers of a terrestrial world, instead of the greater dangers of nesting in the sea. Female grunion dig into the wet sand tail first. They struggle to release their eggs. Male grunion encircle nesting females and deposit their milt. The sperm filters down through the sand, fertilizing the mass of eggs. Along miles of beach, seabirds feast on this overwhelming bounty. Quickly, however, even their appetites are sated. Now, largely unmolested, millions more grunion come ashore to spawn. After depositing their eggs, they squirm back into the water and vanish with the receding tide. In 10 days, the tide will rise to this height again, stimulating the eggs to hatch. Evening darkens the waters of the Gulf, and juvenile sea lions spend these twilight hours practicing their lovemaking technique. As the evening moon rises, the Sea of Cortes sinks into darkness. This is the hour of the night beast. Gigantic Humboldt squid, 6 feet and nearly 100 pounds of jet-propelled predator. The squid captures its prey with 10 powerful tentacles. Each is armed with needle-sharp hooks which dig into the victim's flesh. It tears its prey apart with a beak strong enough to crush a person's arm. The squid's eye is the most complex in the invertebrate world. It can see in nearly total darkness, and good vision is important to these very intelligent creatures. By changing the color and pattern of their skin, they communicate to each other emotions of fear, passion, and rage. As quickly as they arrived, the squid are gone, leaving this dark realm to creatures of pure fantasy. These luminous phantasms are the webs spun by tiny creatures called larvaceans. By moonlight, a familiar predator is still looking for his evening meal. He's not concerned about the larger predators that also hunt the reef by night. The scorpion fish is confident in his arsenal of venomous dorsal spines. One puncture could send a person to the hospital. But this moray eel is very hungry, hungry enough to eat anything. The scorpion fish has attempted his escape too late and is now locked in the powerful jaws of the moray. His only defense is to erect his venom-laden spines, which could be painful or even fatal to the eel. For the moray, however, the pain of hunger is even greater than the pain inflicted by venomous spines. Many diurnal fish sleep in caves at the base of the reef. The parrotfish has no eyelid, and though his eye is open, his brain is sound asleep. But the reef itself is wide awake and bursting with color as nocturnal corals extend their polyps to feed on plankton. As day breaks, the corals retract, safe from daytime grazers. The rising sun finds great predators returning to the seamount after a night hunting in deep water. Hammerheads. No one knows why these 15-foot sharks gather here. Perhaps it's to be groomed by the swarms of cleaner fish that rush up from the reef to greet them. But gather they do, by the hundreds, perhaps by the thousands. Whatever the primary reason for the gathering of these great schools, one result is mating. Mating is a strange and violent affair in sharks, and stranger still in hammerheads. Courtship takes place high in the water column, and when the pair embrace, the necessary contortion prevents swimming. Locked together, they fall, only separating upon impact with the reef below. The ocean floor is an underwater kaleidoscope. To enter here is to enter a paradise of dazzling corals and sea fans. Untouched and unspoiled, millions of creatures are entwined in this ancient web of life. Now is the season for mating. Butterfly fish gather in preparation for spawning. Here, a school of sergeant majors have selected their nesting site among a group of large boulders. The male carries most of the domestic responsibility. He constantly grooms the nest and chases away intruders. When a suitable female arrives, he stands guard as she deposits her eggs on the surface of the rock. Occasionally, the male passes over the eggs and releases sperm to fertilize them. The eggs are tiny, but large enough to offer a tempting snack for nest robbers, like rainbow wrasse. Then, protecting the nest becomes his greatest challenge. But once the nest has been violated by one robber, word gets out fast that the nest is vulnerable. Soon, even other sergeant majors are attacking his nest. Realizing that all is lost, the male himself participates in eating his last remaining eggs. For others, breeding is less traumatic. Rainbow wrasse release sperm and egg into the water. Their parental care ends there. Bull sea lions are a contentious lot. They spend much of their time arguing over who gets to crawl out on which rock. But young sea lions spend their days at play. Like children, these youngsters will put anything into their mouths. They'll even eat pebbles. These juveniles are past the weaning stage, but hunting for their own food is too much trouble. They'll take advantage of an easy meal. For 10 days, the grunion eggs have incubated in the warm sand, awaiting the next spring tide. But the grunion's strategy has not been completely foolproof. Flocks of sandpipers mob the beach, probing deep in the sand for eggs. But as the tide returns, the next generation of grunion will have their chance. The rising waters stimulate the eggs to hatch. Soon, the fry emerged from the sand to face immediate peril. Yet millions survived to drift away with the receding tide, presenting another passing meal for the tube blenny. Getting meals is risky for the blenny. There are always rainbow wrasse around which would like to make a meal out of him. But sometimes the sky darkens with such fearsome shadows that even his strong barnacle home must seem inadequate. As before, the unfamiliar shadow moves on, and the terrible rumble fades. A hermit crab has cultivated a beautiful garden of anemones on his shell. Unfortunately, it's a shell he's outgrown. It's time to move on to a bigger home. He tests a new shell for size. It's a comfortable fit, but he needs his anemone garden. Their stinging tentacles are important protection from octopuses. They too will have to move. The anemones are almost impossible to remove by force without destroying them, but the crab's gentle prodding is a signal for the anemones to release their grasp and submit to relocation. With his new home and anemone garden overhead, the hermit crab moves on confidently. What strange forces move these coral fingers? The staghorn hermit crab has made his home here. Instead of anemones, he plants living coral on his borrowed shell. The coral eventually dissolves the shell, replacing it with its own extravagant design. Another crab, another housing problem. The sponge crab has a pair of legs high on his back. They're specially modified to hold his large hat of living sponge. It's not as fashionable as the staghorn crab's beautiful home. However, the sponge conceals the crab from predators. A large hat can be awkward, but it's a small price to pay for home security. There are other unique residents in the neighborhood. The turbot, which carries two bulbous eyes on one side of his head. The frogfish, which uses his fins for walking rather than swimming. The sea cucumber, which grooms the reef like a living vacuum cleaner. But some of the strangest and most beautiful creatures are the sea slugs, or nudibranchs, which scour the reef for food. This one, however, is a cannibal. The sea tiger follows the trails of other nudibranchs and engulfs them with its deadly oral veil. But each species of nudibranch has a route of escape. The tamia nudibranch flees by flipping away at first touch. Only the most ravenous sea tiger will tolerate the foul taste of this slimy nudibranch. The white-lined nudibranch has appendages on its attractive coat. They can break off, leaving the sea tiger with merely a snack. But what happens when two sea tigers encounter each other? The reaction is immediate and violent, but the touch of their own kind quickly arouses mating passions. Mating organs protrude from each nudibranch's side as they maneuver for contact. Each animal is male and female. They simply exchange both eggs and sperm with each other. Rising currents over the seamount carry with it other vessels from inner space. On the rubble field below, an army of cushion stars is on the march. Their progress, however, is undetectable to the human eye. But when hours are compressed into seconds, the march is seen to be well organized. It's a feeding march. While starfish at the front of the line stop to feed, starfish in the rear move over them to glean the sand of food. Another creature lurks beneath the field of coralline algae. As the current builds, hordes of flower urchins rise from the rubble and begin a march of their own. This is not a feeding march. Stimulated by the current, the urchins are rising to spawn. As they move, they begin to smoke with sperm. Others release streams of eggs to be carried by the current, colonizing the reefs and rubble fields of distant seamounts. When their march is done, the urchins bury themselves again, using hundreds of tubed feet. The mantis shrimp hunts the rubble field for a tasty crab or mollusk. Armed with shell-crushing claws and equipped with bifocal binocular vision, the mantis shrimp is a most formidable crustacean. In this cold abyss, thick clouds of mysid shrimp flourish. As the tides ebb and currents slacken, sardine schools rise again to feed at the surface. Near shore, sea lions dance and play within living pools of quicksilver. Clouds of sardines attract predators like these machete. But in their rush to attack sardines, machetes might not notice the arrival of their attackers, sailfish. As changing currents roil the water with plankton, the manta ray moves in to feed. In graceful loops, the manta drives schools of plankton to the surface and scoops them into its mouth. Other residents also return from their journeys, and the sky above the seamount fills once again with the movements of schooling jacks and tuna. In multitudes, they pass over the blenny's tiny barnacle. Other familiar shadows return. But in the distance, a disturbing rumble is heard. A now familiar shadow is passing over the blenny's home, but this time, it's moving closer. This gaping maw is 5 times wider than the mouth of a whale shark. It rushes across the rubble field, swallowing everything in its path. Few animals are quick enough to escape. In its wake, the rubble field is destroyed, the residents gone. They end up here on the hot steel deck of the shrimp trawler. This predator sifts through the dead and dying, looking only for shrimp. The rest is incidental kill. The scorpion fish. The snake eel. The octopus. The stingray, even the mantis shrimp. On this trawl, only 5 pounds of shrimp were harvested. The remaining 500 pounds of trash fish are shoved back into the sea at a cost of 100 pounds of slaughter for a single pound of shrimp. A shrimp dinner is a very expensive meal indeed. The tube blenny looks up at the shadows of death. Overfishing is ravaging the Sea of Cortes. The problem is being debated, but so far Mexico has no laws to stop it. The day may come when the shadows of great creatures no longer darken the blenny's tiny home.
The formidable problems of human travel to the Red Planet. Quest for Planet Mars on Space Age, next at 8 here on Channel 36.
This is PBS.